means that it is the continuation of the Naksa to this day. It hasn't really stopped for the Palestinians. Of course, there was the ethnic cleansing in 1948, around 750,000 Palestinians, then continued in the Naksa with around 300,000 Palestinians being expelled from their lands. But what this means basically for commemorating this day, the Naksa Day, is that for Palestinians, really, this is the beginning of the end of the Palestinian state. Always when we're talking about the Palestinian question or the Israel-Palestine conflict, we go from the 67 war, the Six-Day War, which was initiated by Israel with Operation Focus upon Egypt. We go from the illegal annexation of land in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and we can call it an annexation now because not only have they occupied it, but they've basically just annexed it, like they did the Golan in 1981 from Syria. This is always the beginning of the conversation for the Palestinians now. We go from 67 borders, and that's where it comes from. We don't ever discuss what happened in 1948, what happened in 1956 in the Suez Crisis. We don't discuss anything before that. And for the Palestinian people, commemorating this day is the day that so many people who are now living in the West Bank and Gaza Strip and outside of Palestine are thinking about all of their family members who were driven from their lands.
So, Robert, looking at today, though, have Palestinians lost faith with the foundation of the idea of peace through negotiations?
I think so. I think that there cannot be a viable two-state solution anymore. And the two-state solution, like we just talked about a moment ago, it comes from the 67 border perspective. It doesn't really give any sort of option for the Palestinian refugees. And this has always been the great opposition from the Palestinian side against the two-state solution and talks. Also, how can you have peace talks with the Israelis when they're continuing to oppress you, when they are never delivering anything to the table, anything viable? And now we have Trump's so-called deal of the century coming. The deal of the century is a financial incentive to try and coerce the Palestinians who in the Gaza Strip have been sanctioned by the Palestinian Authority and, of course, squeezed by the economic blockade, which is getting worse and worse. In February of 2018, there was declared state of emergency in the Gaza Strip, trying to offer them this economic incentive in order to give up the dreams of any sort of state, whether that be in the 67 borders or all of Palestine in a one-state solution, like many people are advocating. So I think most Palestinians think that it's almost delusional to start talking about entering into negotiations again, because at this point, Jerusalem has been pulled off of the table. Donald Trump has said that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and the Americans are the ones that are supposed to be the peace brokers. So at this moment, I think people have really lost hope.
So just very briefly, though, really briefly, do you think demonstrations are serving its purpose as a human rights activist?
Well,
getting enough recognition?
I don't think it's getting enough recognition because this is a Gandhi-like tactic. And lots of people said if the Palestinians went to the fence like they did they began on the 30th of March, 2018, 305 roughly Palestinian demonstrators have been gunned down, killed, murdered. This includes men, women, children, the elderly. We can go through the list. 34,000 people injured, 17,000 with live ammunition. And what's happened? There have been human rights reports. The UNHRC has adopted a human rights report, but it's not been taken to the ICC, the International Criminal Court. There's been no sanctions carried out against Israel. So these people are going there and dying for no reason. And the problem with this is now Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and the armed factions there as well will have to consider, well, if we continue to protest and our people continue to get killed, nobody's going to do anything. They're going to justify it by saying there was clashes. No Israeli soldiers have been killed. And even under international law, via the Fourth Geneva Convention and specific extensions of it, say that they're allowed to fight those armed troops. But that's another question. The fact that they're going there and getting gunned down, and the media justifies it in the West largely. They try to justify it. There's no action taken from the international community, hard action. This proves the point to the Palestinians in Gaza that the only way left, viable option, is for us to try and fight with whatever weapons they have.